No surprise, really, that he's stepping down?
A lot of talk in Washington, D.C. about this. He does have young children. The speaker's job is as probably intensive as the president or vice president. You're with security all the time. You have no freedom of your time. I can see it.
So he's walking away, and he's like, my job here is done.
Yes.
We got the tax reform bill passed, which is probably what he wanted more than anything.
Well, it's a promise he made, and it's a promise kept. Now, whether that tax bill, and it's certainly controversial, proves to be a good one, we'll see over time.
All right, let's be cynical here and talk about the reality of the politics in Wisconsin and across the country. Everybody's talking about this blue wave that's coming. We've already seen signs that that's happened in some of the elections, the special elections, up to now. Paul Ryan's seat is, I believe, Janesville, Wisconsin, which is a little more Republican than Democrat, but one of the Republicans that is now running, since he's not, is a neo-Nazi. Another Republican hasn't raised much cash. The one person who has raised a lot of cash is the Democrat.
Well, what we're seeing across the nation is, first, a lot of Republicans saying, I'm not running, like between 43 and 46. Right. Dems have to pick up 25 seats, thereabouts, to take control. That presents a big problem for the Republicans coming up here in 2018.
And a lot of those seats are Republicans in districts that Clinton carried in the last election.
That's true, and many of them are actually retiring, walking away from the House. A few are moving into elections in other offices. But there's a trend going on here, and I think Paul Ryan has committed to staying there and trying to win the majority, but who knows?
All right, last question on Paul Ryan. Do you think he's really just kind of getting out before things potentially get even worse in Washington, let things settle down, and then step in 2 years and say, I'm running for president?
Well, there are people who are speculating that that may be the case. Remember, he was a reluctant Speaker of the House. He could be a reluctant presidential aspirant or candidate. He's the right age. He's 48 now. He'd be 50. You know, it lines up pretty nicely, and it gives him time with his family for a couple of years, and then he can get back into public office.
All right, I know you spend quite a bit of time studying the military and military history. So what do you make of what the president is doing in Syria? We already have the Russian Navy is leaving Syrian ports. Syrian soldiers and Russians are digging in Syria in anticipation because of a tweet from the president.
Well, I think the minute the president talked about it, they realized that there's every chance that something's going to happen. The reality on the ground is that we have deconfliction agreements with the Russians. So at the moment we say we're coming into a certain area, we have already told the Russians where we're coming. They have already picked up the phone and told the Syrians. So that's a piece of this. And then the other thing is, of course, if they decide to hit ports and things like that, the Russians are getting out in advance.
So what options does the president have? He's already kind of played one hand and saying, I'm going to fire missiles, and they've reacted to that. We don't know if he will fire missiles.
Well, we don't know that. I can't believe something's not going to happen, so I have to assume something is going to happen. What exactly, we don't know. But we know that the world is very moved by what happened in Syria, and somebody should be held to account. The problem is that you're not going to be able to do anything that solves the problem ultimately in Syria. We don't do decapitation strikes. In other words, we don't put a missile down Assad's chimney, even though that we know where he is. It just isn't done that way. So what you end up doing is hitting assets someplace. And does that really deter a guy like Assad? Probably not. We already saw one time it did not.
And not only Assad, but this has an effect on ISIS potentially rebuilding in Iraq, the Kurd situation with Turkey. I mean, Syria is a very complicated country with a lot going on.
Absolutely. There are numerous factions, and the allegiances change all the time there for all kinds of reasons. The Middle East has been a quagmire for years, but what we've learned, Ken, is if you go in and you take out the dictator, whether it's Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi, there's a vacuum. And then all these
bad guys
people
come in.
Exactly, and try to take over.
We saw that in Libya and other places
absolutely.
too. But stepping back, the big picture here is President Trump as commander-in-chief and how he's handling this situation, how he's handled past situations, his relationship with the U.S. military and the Pentagon. Apparently, the Defense Department was completely caught flat-footed by this tweet saying that missiles are coming. Where does this put Donald Trump in his place as commander-in-chief with the military, with Congress, with the people he needs to work with to get things done?
Well, traditionally, the president would meet with his military advisors, and they would come up with a plan. He seems, typically, to get out in front of it. But what that tells me is he's already been briefed on some ideas. And this is the same person that was criticizing other presidents for announcing what military action they were going to take before it happened. So this is the conflict, but we see this with this president all the time, and nothing changes.
All right. Well, hopefully the Syria situation will be resolved without much more violence, especially regarding civilians.
Absolutely, and that's the key.
Brian Sobel, thank you very much.